Welcome to the Perfect Life Awakening Show, hosted by Royce Morales. Royce has been a transformational facilitator, teaching groundbreaking, spiritually based courses for more than 4 decades. She is the author of 3 books about her teachings. Join Royce as she takes you on a journey into how to live your best life and find your true purpose through discovering the origins of subconscious, disempowering notions and releasing them. She talks with experts and inspiring people just like you who learned to trust their intuitive inner wisdom, which led to life-changing shifts. Today, her guests live an empowered existence and are helping change the world to a higher consciousness place based on truth and love. You deserve to awaken to, align with, and embody your true self and live a life filled with love. Transform yourself from triggered to empowered and create your perfect life. Here is your host, Royce Morales.
Hello, welcome to the Perfect Life Awakening Show. I'm Royce Morales, and I'm so thrilled that you are joining us today. I have a very special guest who will be talking about toxic religion and what that means and the effects that it might be having on you without you even realizing it. But before I welcome my guest, I want to share, it's so interesting to me that whenever I have somebody scheduled to come on, whatever topic it is, the universe conspires to help me prepare for the show. I was driving in my car the other day, and just randomly, out of the blue, came a Beatles song that I haven't heard in a million years. Actually, it's a John Lennon song, and it's called God. And in this song, the first sentence is, he says, God is a concept by which we measure our pain. And then he goes on to talk about what he doesn't believe in. I don't believe in religion. I don't believe in this and that and the other thing. And the very last thing he says is, but I do believe in me and Yoko. And I just listened to that and I said, oh my God, thank you, John. How perfect. So just to let you guys know, I was raised with no particular religion. My mother and father were Jewish, but they were not religious at all. And as a very young person, I was probably about 10, I started craving something that I perceived in religion. I think it was the beauty that I would see in the churches. And I just wanted that. And I begged my mother, please let me go to church. And she just thought I was crazy since she didn't relate to anything spiritual. She was an intellectual. And eventually, with a lot of my own searching, I researched every religion I could find. And I found that there was so much in it that I couldn't buy into. And I shifted into my spiritual search and let all the religion go. And I felt like spirituality became my calling in life. And I became a spiritual teacher, and I help some people get past the notions of religion and discover their own spirituality. And my guest today is going to talk about all that and what the effects of the authoritative religious dogma actually has on us. And I've had a lot of people that had a hard time understanding what I was saying because they were trying to look at it through religious eyes. And I never invalidate anybody's religion, but it's sometimes really tough. And then I remind people that I think it's 18 books of the Bible were taken out, especially the information that Jesus had about reincarnation. And I said, yeah, that was all taken out because it took away some of the church's control. So sometimes that helps people get more in touch with, maybe there's something to this spiritual stuff. So what I love about what Dr. Daniel does, and I'll introduce her in a second and give you her background, she helps people to really get in touch with grief and grieve properly, so to speak, so that things do get resolved. And I talk a lot about that in my courses. She talks about death and how to deal with death without some of the religious dogma, and even staunch believers she deals with. So I think that's just wonderful. So she's an expert, and I'll just read this about her because I never remember all the information about my guest. She's an expert on the effects of fear-based, or what she calls toxic religious beliefs, getting in the way to process loss, trauma, and grief in a healthy way, and especially how theology impacts the experience of dying. And I don't know about you, but I think dying is one of those things that we're dying to find out about, pardon the pun. I think everybody is. I've dealt with people that claim staunch religious beliefs about dying, and yet they still have fear that maybe they admit to about what will happen after death. Dr. Terri Daniel, is a hospice supportive care counselor, end of life educator, grief counselor, certified in death, dying, and bereavement, and a trauma support professional. She has a BA in religious studies, an MA in pastoral care, a doctor of ministry in pastoral care, and thanatology and chaplaincy. She's also the founder, and she'll talk about this. She's the founder of the Conference on Death, Grief, and Belief. And she also has her own podcast called Ask Dr. Death. I love that. She's helped hundreds of people learn to live, die, and grieve more consciously. Her work is acclaimed by hospice, I can't say that word, hospice professionals, spiritual seekers, counselors, theologians, and academics worldwide. She has written 4 books on death, grief, and the afterlife. So welcome, Dr. Terri Daniel. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you, Royce. And I have to tell you, you're describing your background. It's like we grew up in the same family.
Maybe we did.
Yeah, I mean, that's just exactly my story. My parents were Jewish, technically, but they didn't believe in any of it. And we'd have Passover Seder every year, and they'd read the Haggadah that you get in the box of matzah. They did this because it was a good reason to have a party. And I was the only person who had any interest in religion. And again, same as you, I don't know why. And I went and bought a Bible when I was 16 and started reading it. And my dad, who was an intellectual, Jewish LA intellectuals, had a bunch of books on religion. And when I was 12, I tried to read them all. And then when I was about 16, a Hare Krishna temple moved in around the corner from our house. So I went there all the time. So I really, very similar to you.
Was that in Culver City?
Not far, West LA, if you know LA, kind of Pico Robertson area.
That's where I lived. Oh my gosh.
What high school did you go to?
Hamilton.
Me too.
Oh my God, this is so bizarre.
What year did you graduate?
69.
I graduated in 70.
Oh, how funny. Well, we'll have to compare notes.
We were there at the same time. That's crazy.
So wow.
Okay.
So I was going to ask you your background, so now I don't have to ask that. So what made you shift into what you do? What is the inspiration that got that?
Well, I was always interested in metaphysical stuff. So along with everything that I just said and all the books that I found and tried to read, I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead when I was 19. And I was also reading books. Do you remember Jean Dixon?
Oh, yes.
I read her book. She was a psychic, and she was into astrology. So I was dabbling in that, in 1970-ish. And it just always felt right to me. Unlike many of the people I work with, I did not have to break away from traditional religion. I just was free to begin with. And this really became an important topic for me much later in life when I started doing hospice work and realizing that so many of the people I was working with, my clients and patients, were having so much anxiety around death and then later around grief because of their religious beliefs. And I ended up doing my doctoral dissertation on toxic theology as a contributing factor in complicated grief. Complicated grief is an actual thing. There is a sort of normal trajectory of healthy grief that most people go through, But then there are times when you can have complications, just like you have complications from a medical procedure, right? Like you break your leg, but you get an infection. So with grief, you can kind of get an infection, so to speak. And religious beliefs contribute to that. And so I started to see that happening all around me. And it became my big research topic.
So describe what complicated grief means to you.
That's a whole other topic, but and it's controversial because in the last edition of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, it's actually listed in there as a diagnosable condition. And what that means is that if your 95-year-old mother dies after having many years of illness and dementia and whatever, that's expected. That's normal. In 6 months, you're going to be perfectly fine. You're going to sell her house and clean out the stuff, and your life is going to go on. If you are still crying every day and unable to function a year after that mother dies, there's something wrong with that process. There's something else going on there, unresolved guilt, a million factors that can contribute. That's one way to understand complicated grief. Now, if your 5-year-old child gets hit by a car, yeah, you're still going to be crying in a year. You might go into deep depression. I mean, it's different. It's a different kind of death and a different kind of loss. There's a lot of reasons for complicated grief. What it basically means is that it doesn't follow an expected, based on what we know from research, trajectory of healing. You don't heal. You're suffering just as much in 2 years as you were in 2 months. And that's not supposed to happen.
Even with the death of a child.
Yeah, I've lost a child. My son died when he was 16. And I know people who have a really hard time recovering, who are suffering just as much at 2 years as 2 months. And that's because there are, contributing factors. Extreme guilt. If the child dies of suicide and you feel like it was your fault, if you believe suicides go to hell, and so you think your child's in hell, and you are a good Christian, so you're not going to hell. You're never going to see your child in the afterlife. So that's one way that religious beliefs contribute to that, if you believe that.
Yeah. So tell us exactly, and talk as long as you want about this, because I've been reading on your website. There's a lot to say. What exactly is toxic theology? What does that mean?
Okay, I'm going to give you I'm actually going to read these because they're stated better than I could off the top of my head. They're actually definitions of toxic theology that we have, from scholarship and research. And it's kind of matches with the definition of a cult. So it's an authoritarian power hierarchy that demands obedience, policies of separation. These people are saved, those people are not. These people are good, those people are sinners. Restricted access to outside sources of information. So if you look at people who are raised in what we call high demand religious environments, such as that documentary that's on Amazon streaming right now about the Duggars, that family, with 18 children or whatever, they were members of a really extreme Christian cult. And in those families, in those groups, you're not allowed to see newspapers, watch TV, radio, hear nothing contemporary. You are only exposed to the teachings of your religious sect. So that's the restricted access to outside sources, restricted access to education, homeschooling in a Christian curriculum. And those are more cultish. Psychological mind control that encourages isolation. People who are really involved in toxic theology only socialize with people in their own church and in their own group. Everybody outside is suspicious. You're held to a rigid, static system of beliefs. Questioning and exploration is discouraged. Religious flexibility is not allowed. You can't take a little bit of pluralism, flexibility, like you can't incorporate other ideas. You have to go strictly by the book, strictly by doctrine. Mostly it's God is seen as an authoritarian parental figure. God is a man in the sky who watches everything you do. It has, and I'm calling it, not he, it has an opinion about what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to think. And if you don't follow what that God's opinion is, you will be punished. There's no autonomy. There's no agency. You're rewarded for faithfulness and piety, and you are punished for questioning and disobedience. And another one is, there's a long list of this. Natural disasters are seen as punishments by God. I mean, you want to know what toxic theology is? Look at anything that Pat Robertson has ever said in his entire career. And yes, as Chris has just popped in and said, God looks like Charlton Heston from as Moses in that Bible movie, which the 10 Commandments. Thank you, Chris.
Now, did Pat Robertson, who was it that said something about the earthquake in San Francisco is because there were so many gay people there?
Oh, Pat Robertson said that all the time. The earthquake in Haiti was because of gay people. Everything is because of gay people.
Yeah.
Every flood, every tsunami, every earthquake, and gay people, sinners, and non-believers. Yeah. So there's toxic theology in a nutshell. And in America right now, so many people are jumping onto this bandwagon. It's terrifying.
Why?
I wish I knew why.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons why. It's getting a lot of press. I mean, when the president of the United States, is buddies with all these evangelical leaders, nobody gets more press than the president of the United States, right? Especially this last one. Former. Yeah. He gets more media coverage. I mean, if I could be on OMTimes TV 24 hours a day, everybody would listen to what I had to say. So I think that's the biggest reason is the evangelical stuff is just getting so much media exposure. Yeah. Which is how Christianity started in the first place, with Paul, who kind of went all around the Roman Empire pitching his theology. That's why it went platinum, more than any of the other religions, because it had a good marketing campaign.
And he didn't even have email.
Nope. It just had guys walking around threatening eternal damnation if you didn't jump on the bandwagon.
So they just basically made that up. I mean, that's always been my opinion. Made that up. It was not anything experiential or based on fact or research.
Well, the story you're talking about Paul and his writings. The story of Paul is that he was a persecutor of Christians when he started out, and he had a vision of Jesus that struck him blind for 3 days, and then he regained his sight, and now he was transformed, and he went around preaching the message of Jesus. The problem is that there's nothing in Paul's writings about the message of Jesus. Everything that he wrote and everything that he taught was made out of whole cloth, whatever that expression is, just came out. He didn't talk about any of the allegedly sayings and teachings of Jesus. We really don't know what those are. He just kind of made up his own theology and preached it. And that became the Christianity that most people know today. Most people have heard that Jesus said, love your enemies and be peaceful and feed the poor and all that. People do know that because it is in the Bible. But the theology of sin and salvation did not come from there. It came from Paul, because that's how you sell a product.
Yeah, from fear. Yes. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Yeah. So, wow. So that's what toxic theology is. What happens you've mentioned a few things in terms of our ability to grieve and our attitude toward death. What give us some details about what happens from this toxic theology that we're all, or most of us are living from?
Let me go back to the beginning of how we get this toxic theology, because even people like you and me, even though we've broken out of that, it still seeps into our consciousness a little bit. So what happens with most people, and I'm only going to speak about Western Judeo-Christian culture right now. We're told this stuff starting when we're like 3 years old, 2 years old, right? And your parents and your culture, maybe you go to church and they teach you about God created the world and the flood and Noah's Ark and Jonah and the whale, and you learn all that when you're a little kid. Well, if you tell a 3-year-old that elephants can fly, they believe you. They have no reason not to. They don't have that critical thinking. So they're your child and you're going to believe all this. And Santa Claus, right? We all believed in Santa Claus until we didn't. And so most people get that theology as children and they never question it because they have no reason to. You look around, your family's perpetrating it, your neighbors, your school, your community, your church. Why would you change it? What happens is, to many people, a traumatic event will change it. So, I'll give you some examples just from cases that I've seen. Like I had this one man whose 2 teenage children were killed in a car crash. And he told me, and he had terrible complicated grief because he lost his faith in God. And in his words, I never asked God for anything except one thing, just one thing, not a lot. I didn't ask for money. I didn't ask for health. I asked to keep my children safe.
Oh, wow.
And why didn't God give that to me? And this man was going bonkers over this and wasn't able to grieve properly for his children because he was so caught up in this question, which is at the core of existence for most people. If you believe that there is a God like that you can ask for a favor and you're a good person and you go to church and you tithe and you're faithful to your spouse and you do all the right things and still God has your children killed, that messes you up in a deeply existential place, which is the story of Job from the Bible, and it's a fascinating story. For those who don't know, he was this perfect, devoted guy, and God and Satan just made a bet to see if they could test his faith. And so God took all his stuff away, killed all his children, burned down his land, killed all his livestock, gave him terrible diseases to see if he would still love God. And in the end, he did. And at the end of the story, God gives him all his stuff back, but it's new stuff. It's a new wife, new kids, new cattle. I don't know. Nobody knows what the point of this story is or the outcome. And I have sat with classes in seminary discussing this, and we go, so what was the point? There's no answer. It's to show you that, God's always watching you, or God will always be there, and you should never lose your faith. I don't know. There's no answer, but that's how deep that goes with some people. And so, in the case, we'll use this man as an example. He had a couple of choices, what he could have done with that situation. He could have been very angry and very unhealthy in his grief, that was the choice he made. Or he could have changed his theology. He could have said, maybe God doesn't actually work that way. And maybe he's sitting in a coffee shop and he finds a copy of OMTimes laying around and he picks it up and looks at it and he starts to look at other ways of thinking. That's another option that can happen. So, and when you have a faith like that and you have a trauma, you come to a crossroads where you can change your thinking or not.
Yeah. Wow. So let's take a break. It's almost half an hour. Time goes so fast in these interviews. It really does. So let's take a bit of a break. And just to remind everybody, I'm talking to Dr. Terri Daniel, and we will be right back.
OMTimes TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, You become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities. Transform your life from triggered to empowered with the Perfect Life Awakening program. Royce Morales' extraordinary, enlightening, spiritually based teachings that get to the core of subconscious underlying motivations driving your life. With more than 4 decades as a transformational facilitator and author, Royce Morales offers ways to awaken your deserving, authentic existence, free from paralyzing issues, repetitive patterns, and programmed fears, while simultaneously awakening your spiritually aware higher consciousness, purposeful self. Perfect Life Awakening offers remote group classes and one-on-one sessions to explore even deeper levels. Check out Royce Morales' books, Want, True Love, Past Lives, and Other Complications. No, a Spiritual Wake-Up Call. And Back, Rebirth After Stroke. Learn more about Perfect Life Awakening and Royce Morales. Visit roycemorales.com.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. I'm talking to Dr. Terri Daniel. Fascinating discussion. You were mentioning all of the things that toxic religion does, but I'd love to hear your take on what happens from all of that. I know that there's so many things I'm thankful for from my mom, but one of the biggest ones was to have a skeptical attitude. But that definitely seems like it's not encouraged in toxic religion. So what else happens from this type of, I want to call it indoctrination? What else, what are the results of this?
There's a lot of places to find that information. There's some really great podcasts you can find if you just Google recovering from religion, or deconstructing from religion is a term that's commonly used, and listen to people's stories. So, one of the biggest ones is sexual dysfunction, because you're indoctrinated to think that your body is filthy, especially if you're a woman, and that sex is bad. So, and the purity culture, while we're on the topic of sex, is one of the most toxic things. You've probably heard of this thing where a daughter makes a purity commitment to her father. He gives her like an engagement ring, and they have these big parties called purity balls where the fathers dance with the daughter, and she betroths her virginity to her father until she marries. That's very, very common. Google it, purity,
Never heard of
purity
that. That's
culture.
amazing.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere. It's so sick. And so then you're supposed to be a virgin when you marry. So of course you know nothing about sex. It's like this bizarre thing that you don't know what to do with. So you end up having really bad sex all your life, or finding another partner, breaking up your marriage, whatever. And then, of course, we've got clergy abuse of children. Don't even get me started on that topic. That's a whole other thing. It's all about power differential. It's all about, women are at the bottom of the ladder. God, this Charlton Heston, man in the sky, is at the top, then men, then women, then children. And I can tell you, like, from people, so many clients and people that I've had who grew up in cults, if they were not taught how to think. So one of the things that we are taught as children, and even now as a college teacher, my students are mature age. My students are in their 40s and 50s. I'm teaching them how to think for themselves. That's the key. But if you look at what's happening in America right now, because of toxic Christianity and Christian nationalism, we're banning books. We're not allowing children to read the truth about history or about life. I mean, it's insane what's happening now. And so we see it right in front of our eyes every day. And it all begins with toxic theology. And at the very core of it is them and us. If you start with the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, we don't call it that anymore. We call it the Hebrew Bible. That whole story, the history of the Israelites, is a story about politics and real estate. And it's one tribe's story of itself. So imagine in the world 3,000 years ago, there are tribes all over the world, in Japan, in South America, India, wherever, in Antarctica, wherever they are. And everybody's sitting around their campfire talking about telling their origin story. Like, where did our people come from? All tribes do this. That's the origin story of that particular tribe of people that we know as the Israelites. That, Adam and Eve and all of that, that's their origin story. For some reason, that caught on as the origin story for everybody. But it was never that. And in their origin story, what they came up with is, we have this God that likes us better than everybody else. And to show us how much he loves us, he's going to lead us through all these tribulations so that ultimately we will be rewarded with a land of our own, and dominance, and lots of children, and world domination, basically. And so in the stories, it's all about battles and wars and colonizing and taking over other cultures and wiping out their enemies. That's the Old Testament, and so that's where a lot of this is rooted, in separation, them and us. One group has more favor of God than another. Yeah, it's deep stuff.
It is.
A really good podcast that I'm promoting now, it's called Data Over Dogma. It's a brand new podcast by a good friend of mine, Dan Beecher, and another guy who is a brilliant religious scholar, Dan McClellan. And if you guys if you're interested in Bible scholarship, this is a really, really good place to listen. So
you were mentioning both of us were raised Jewish, and you just mentioned the Old Testament. And what about the issue of Orthodox Judaism? It seems kind of cultish, and I know that a lot of what they do is very strange. So have you dealt with that type of indoctrination as well, not just Christian?
Oh yeah, it's all the same. It doesn't matter which religious tradition it's in. So in my conference that's coming up on July 8th, the Conference on Death, Grief, and Belief, one of our presenters is a man named Pesach Eisen, who was raised in an Orthodox cult. So it doesn't matter if you're in a Mormon cult or a Christian cult, it's all the same. So if you look at his Orthodox Jewish thing, it follows these same points that I said earlier. Limited access to education or outside information, a strict code of behaviors that you have to follow. You can be shunned from the group if you question or break away in any way. Women are sublimated, and God is this mean, scary guy in the sky who's watching over you all the time.
Yeah.
In any Abrahamic tradition, that's the same.
Yeah. I was reading on your website that if people have an image of God being this frightening entity, they can actually project that onto the rest of their life. I mean, even their spouses or their friends. Or tell us a little bit about that. I thought that was really interesting.
Well, this new documentary that just came out called Shiny Happy People, which is this documentary about this family, the Duggars, who had this TV show called 19 Kids and Counting. And it's, all been revealed that they were part of this really big Christian cult. And the dad ruled with an iron hand. The wife was meek and submissive, to the point where she talked in a little sweet baby voice like this all the time. And, when her husband is speaking, she looks up at him adoringly. It's just, there's so much, you got to watch it. It's fabulous. The man is a representative of that God. So, the God-fearing father in the family can beat you and abuse you, and he can do anything he wants, because according to that particular cultic thinking, he's a direct representative of God. And so is your priest, by the way, which is why when Father Flanagan gets caught for molesting 20 boys, what do the members of the church do? They raise money for his defense fund, or they transfer him to another parish. Anything other than acknowledge that what he did was wrong, because he's a priest. He's a representative of God. We can't question him. But why is he a representative of God? I have the exact same academic degrees as your priest has. So I'm a representative of God too. What's the difference?
Right, exactly.
And so are you, and so is everybody. Which is
everybody, yeah.
Right.
Oh, God. I have a student right now. She's been working with me for a long time, and she was raised in a cult, and this cult was so abusive, but she happened to be so intelligent that she saw through it from day one. But breaking away from that is taking years. And even though she has broken away technically, it still impacts every day of her life. It's just, it's so strong. And it's gotten in the way of her relationships and her friendships and everything in her life. And it's just so sad to listen to what she went through and how hard it is to break away from that, even mentally and emotionally. So what is it that you actually do to help people to make sense of this, or break away, or heal? What is your tactic?
Good question. Education and support, really. I mean, so this conference, the Conference on Death, Grief, and Belief, is where someone like her can come and learn from people like Pesach Eisen. All, our speakers are all people who are experts on this kind of life and behavior and toxic theology, and just being exposed to other ways of thinking, like this client of yours. If she came to the conference, which is online, so you can watch it all on your computer, she would learn so much by seeing, you see what other people have gone through, and that they survived. They didn't go to hell, right? They aren't shunned. They have new lives where they're healthy. They're not afraid all the time. So education and exposure to other realities is the biggest thing. And then support for your new reality is the next thing. And, forming new communities where you're now surrounded by people who share that new reality with you, a healthy new reality. And in many cases, you have to disconnect from the past people, from the people. If every time you go home to visit your parents on Thanksgiving and they're telling you that you're going to hell because you're gay, don't go there anymore. That's the hard part. You do not have to hang out with people who treat you that way, because it is abuse. And there are a lot of people whose families have sent them to conversion therapy for being gay. Just completely destroys your brain and your dignity to, be told that you're bad and wrong. But being told that you're bad and wrong is the foundation of the Abrahamic religious system. It starts out with original sin. So no matter what you do, you're wrong. So if that's true, then I guess the straight people are just as wrong as the gay people. If we're all sinners and we're all bad and wrong, right?
Right.
I mean, it's just like, it's so ridiculous. It gets to a point where you can't even, you can't even talk about it. Also, religious trauma is becoming a recognized thing in psychology now. So there are therapists, licensed therapists, who specialize in this. There's a really good website, Divorcing Religion. I think it's divorcingreligion.com. That's Janice Selby. She's in Canada. She's a therapist for religious trauma. Marlene Winnell. I don't know if you can put this stuff in the show notes or if I should type it in the chat or whatever, is also, she's written books about this. Her book is called Leaving the Fold. So there's guidance out there. Andrew Jasko is another therapist who specializes, and there's people doing this work now because it's important. It's a thing. It's coming out of the closet.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes so deep, you know. I know that it's one thing, my client that was raised in a cult, she can intellectually do all of these things, but it's so deeply ingrained in her that it's hard to break from that particular aspect of it, which is, you know, some of the work that I do with people that gets to the origin of why it's so impactful. So,
well,
yeah.
the other reason it's impactful is because trauma lives in your body,
Yes.
you know, and so you have to do symbolic representational work and body work. So what I do with people is I will have them, you know, draw a picture, you know, art therapy kind of stuff, like draw a picture of hell as you were, whatever the thing is that you're afraid of. Oh, I'm afraid I'm going to go to hell. Draw a picture of what does hell look like? And let's talk about it. And then let's take the picture and burn it in a fire. Let's get rid of this image or bury it in the earth. Or take all your religious symbols like the Bible that your mother gave you when you were 8. Bury it in the earth, literally, or burn it. Seriously, it's okay to do that because it's part of the healing. You have to do the symbolic representations of releasing the thing from your cells. You can't just do it by talking. You have to do some kind of action.
Yes, definitely. As you're talking, I'm going back to the issue of healthy mourning. I had another friend. He's not a client, but he's a friend, and he lost his father and his wife within 6 months. And he's very, very, very staunch religious. And when anybody would go over to him and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss," he would get this look like, "You're crazy. There was no loss. They're in heaven and it's a better place." And, you know, he would be very defensive about that. And I would watch him and I would think, God, someday he's just going to explode with all that unresolved, unfelt grief because of the rationalization that he's using religion to get through these very sad events. So what would you do in a situation like that?
That is called spiritual bypassing.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And New Age people do it too. Everybody
Oh, yeah.
does it. And yeah, that is an issue. And, you know, it's perpetrated by, if you Google appropriate Christian grief, that phrase, there's actually a thing called appropriate Christian grief. It will tell you to do exactly what that man is doing.
Wow.
And it's even in scripture, in Paul again, where he says, you know, you're not going to grieve as others do because you know that, you know, your loved one has the kingdom of heaven. Well, that's true. You know, we know that too, if we think that our loved ones are, you know, in the cosmos, you know, having their life review and, you know, they're going to reincarnate, whatever your belief system is. Yeah, we know that. That's cool. But we still have to acknowledge the human part. And what toxic theology does is it separates you from your humanity. You're not supposed to be human. You're not supposed to have a sex drive. You're not supposed to grieve. You're not supposed to need food, clothing, and shelter. You're not supposed to feel pain of any kind. You're supposed to suffer. So it all comes under that same heading. And, you know, that man, if he was one of my hospice clients, and he said that to me, I would say, yeah, that's great. You know, you're probably right. You know, I'm sure that they are in a better place. But what's life like for you every day?
Yeah.
How, you know, let's put that religious stuff in another compartment for a minute. And how are you functioning? That's what you look at with grief work is, are you eating properly? Are you, you know, or are you sleeping all day and overeating or not eating or drinking too much or, you know, numbing yourself? Are you able to go to work? Are you able to take care of your house, keep it clean? How are your relationships? That's what you look at. The belief system doesn't matter. But if his belief system has gotten to the point where it's not even really connected. You know, what you look at when people are grieving is how they're functioning. Yeah. And if he tells you, "Oh, I have stomach cancer," you know what happened there. You know, because that's how it'll manifest. That unresolved grief will make you physically sick.
And I'm sure he would say, "Oh, I'm just fine."
Yeah, but maybe, 2 months after his wife died, he did get cancer, and, and a big part of that, it's connected, that's that trauma. I'm not saying that that's always what causes cancer,
Right.
but
Right.
for somebody like that, if that's for sure, because you don't have your vitality, you don't have your stamina, you don't have your immune system when
Yeah.
you're not metabolizing your grief. And that's the word I love to use. It's like eating food. So when you eat food, the good nutrients stay in your body and become fuel, and the bad stuff gets pooped out, and you process. And you do that with grief too. And if you're not allowing it to metabolize, it's just sitting there like a lump. It will make you sick.
Yeah. So one more question. We just have a few minutes left, but I'm just dying to know, do you ever confront religion directly, or do you ever get blowback from any religions? Do they come after you in any way? How do you deal with all that?
They don't, because I don't have a big enough platform. It's like I would love to have a big, to be on CNN or something where enough people would hear me that would happen. But that really doesn't happen. And also, because I'm a hospice chaplain, I'm trained to be religiously neutral in my work. So I would never say stuff like this when I'm wearing my hospice hat. I would never say this to my clients. I wouldn't say it to my coworkers. This is my extracurricular interest. But as a chaplain, like I said, if I was talking to that man who said, I know they're in a better place, I wouldn't argue with him. The only time I would push back on that is if somebody was on their deathbed and they're having terrible anxiety and they're so scared because they're afraid they're going to hell. I would try to talk them out of that idea, which we're really not supposed to do, but there are ways to do it, and I know a hospice chaplain who once whispered in a dying person's ear, I'm going to tell you this, and it's the truth. There is no hell. I want you to know this in your last moments of life. And, we're not supposed to do that,
Right.
But we're supposed to meet people where they are. But sometimes if where they are is causing undue anxiety for them and their family, it's a tough call for us. But, we have to be careful so I don't get a lot. And same with my teaching at the universities. I try to keep this subdued because in this environment of limited free speech on campus these days, I could get in a lot of trouble.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry about that. I'd love for you to just broadcast it to the world. So
Me too. If anyone listening knows how to get to Anderson Cooper,
there you go.
Send me his way.
Yes. So if you were to define your mission in maybe a paragraph or so, what would it be? What is your ultimate goal with all this?
Oh, that's a great question. To give people the tools to help them develop critical thinking skills about theology. One sentence.
Okay. So that ...
So that they can, make up their own minds. So that they can, look at what's presented to them and analyze it intelligently rather than just take it on faith because somebody told them. There's two ways to look at religious teachings. One is called devotional, where it's like, yeah, this is the word of God. I believe this. And the other is called historical critical. So you look at the stories like the Exodus or just any story from the Bible, and you have the tools to say, well, who wrote the story? What was their political agenda? What was really going on with these people at this time? Is there historical evidence that this thing happened? Is there more than one account of this thing happening? Like the Exodus story, the only account of that story of the people being freed from Egypt and all of that is in the Bible. It doesn't exist anywhere else in history, which is a clue that it's a myth and not a historical piece. So that would be my goal, is to teach people how to analyze like that.
Yay. We need you. So tell our listeners about the conference that you're doing.
It's called the Conference on Death, Grief, and Belief. You can find it at deathgriefandbelief.com. And it used to be called the Afterlife Conference. I started the Afterlife Conference in 2009 and ran it that way for 10 or 11 years. And then COVID happened, and so it went online. But at the same time is when I finished my doctoral dissertation on toxic theology, and I decided to change the conference to a focus on toxic theology. I was just, not that there was anything wrong with the Afterlife Conference. It was all about, after-death communication and near-death experience, and all of that is still good. But 10 years of that, I just kind of got tired of it and wanted to move on to something else. And so I changed it to this. I lost a big chunk of my following because of that, because there's always so many people wanting to hear about near-death experience and after-death communication. But there's other conferences, there's a lot of other sources for that. And I just did it for so many years. And so I want to be the source now for this other thing. Mm-hmm. So the conference has scholars and theologians and all, people who have left that religious structure, who are talking about their stories or talking about their research. And it's going to be online July 8th and 9th of this year. I hope this will be broadcast before that. And so I love to see all of your listeners there.
Wow. And is it an all-day?
It's all day Saturday and all day Sunday, July 8th and 9th. And it's online, and everything's going to be recorded. So if you can't be there in person, you can watch the recordings later.
Right. And so you were saying that it used to be about the afterlife. I'm just so curious, what is your view about the afterlife?
Oh, I totally believe in afterlife. I believe that our dead people can communicate with us and all of that, And if you go to my old website, afterlifeconference.com, you'll see a lot of stuff, everything about what that conference was about. And we had all the big mediums there. We had Suzanne Northrup and Austin Wells and John. Gosh, why am I forgetting? Not John Edwards, the other John. Anyway, and all, Raymond Moody and Eben Alexander and Anita Morjani, all those people, who were writing books about that. That was our network for a long time. And I had all the top people in the afterlife field over the 10 years of the conference. And there really isn't any leader in that field now like there was 5 or 8 years ago. So I've kind of maxed out all the big superstars who are doing that work now. And there's a couple like Sam Parnia, who is a medical doctor, who is doing all the new research now on near-death experience. And I would love to get him to speak at my conference, but he's unreachable. But, the old research, Raymond Moody and Melvin Morse, that stuff's outdated now. A new generation is coming. Yeah. And Sam Parnia is leading the way on that.
I had a guest on a few weeks ago that experienced a near-death experience, and it was so frightening to her. Very frightening. And she's going to be back on along with a person that's an expert in, I forget what it's called, near-death experiences, but they're scary, terrifying. And there's a lot of research being done on that. So that should be a really interesting show as well.
Well, the reason they're terrifying when that happens, which is not common, is the thing is, when you die and you're resuscitated, you're only just stepped through the threshold. You're not like way into the real afterlife yet, because you're coming back. And we take our cultural images with us into that world. So there's been a ton of studies on this. Greg Shushin is probably the leading researcher on this, who shows that, if you come from an African tribe where you believe the chief of your tribe can reincarnate as a lion, when you go to the afterlife, you're going to see him as a lion, and you're going to come back and tell your tribe about it. And that's going to become their belief system. If you believe in hell and that belief is deeply in you somewhere, you're going to have a hellish experience when you just stepped your foot into the threshold. But if you stay dead, you don't come back. Eventually, from what so many people have taught us, is that goes away. Because that's just a carryover from your indoctrination. And we know this because, Christians will see Jesus and Hindus will dance with Shiva and atheists will see Disney characters, so you carry it with you.
That's great. That's wonderful. So give out your information again and your podcast and your website and your everything. Tell us where people can.
So just really the best way to find all of this is deathgriefandbelief.com. I also, for teaching and workshops, you can go to spiritualityandgrief.com. So those are two different things. Spirituality and grief is where you'll see like all my workshops and stuff that's coming up in events. But the big thing that I'm really working on now is deathgriefandbelief.com. That's my passion at the moment.
And your podcast that I mentioned at the
beginning. My podcast. Yeah, I forgot about that. That's called Ask Dr. Death, and it's doctor spelled out DOCTOR, not DR, because DR Dr. Death is Jack Kevorkian. So, so Ask Dr. Death, and it's a great podcast. We don't publish a lot just because I don't have time. I do most of the episodes with my friend Karen Wyatt, who's a hospice physician, but unlike many podcasts, we don't come out with one like once a week. We do like maybe 6 a year. So, but it's good stuff.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for all that you're doing for the world, Dr. Terri Daniel. And I always like to end by with an affirmation. And my affirmation today is deserve to discover your spiritual truth. Trust the God consciousness inside of you. And remember what John Lennon said, God is just a concept to measure our pain. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Royce. Thank you, Chris.